Hello, everybody. This is the Wednesday, January 22nd version of Wednesday with Walton and Reis, brought to you via the cardinalnation.com in video form and in audio form at the Scoop Sports Network and all your favorite podcast apps. You would have not been listening had you not noticed that I changed the title of this every week because after the great success we had last week, popular demand said that Kyle Reis needed to be back every week as part of this podcast. And he showed up to Winter Warm-Up as I did, and I twisted his arm until he said yes. So here we are. We're going to be coming to you every Wednesday. Kyle, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Brian, it is an absolute pleasure. I'm really excited about getting the opportunity to do this with you on a regular basis.
And it's great also to have all of Kyle's community who followed him very closely at Birds on a Black and through his Prospects After Dark to listen in on what we have to say here. A lot of times, of course, we'll be focusing on the Cardinals minor league system, and minor leaguers are going to come up in today's episode, but it's probably a sidebar because, as I mentioned, we both spent the last 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, at Winter Warm-Up, and we wanted to use this episode to share some of the thoughts that we had. Kyle, why don't you go first, and what was one of the first impressions that you had from the weekend that you wanted to discuss?
Yeah, we started the weekend with Chris Roycroft and Drew Rom, but then the third person on deck was the third person to come up was John Mozeliak, and the only thing you can take from the Mozeliak press conference was it still is all about Arenado, Arenado, Arenado. He said priority number 1, 2, and 3 is still coming to a resolution with Nolan Arenado. What his final spot looks like, where it ends up being. He did mention that obviously the market, and a lot of people will point to Alex Bregman, still dictates where how Arenado's market might develop. But that was the first thing. Every question about the roster construction went right back to Arenado. He did mention that they're still, they would still like to add to the bullpen, that they still would be interested in bringing in a right-handed bat. He didn't really say in what capacity. We didn't really ask in what capacity. But that was the first major, I guess, theme that kind of interweaved throughout the whole weekend.
And he really didn't make it clear as to whether he could make those other moves without Arenado or not. Chances are they're not going to be big dollar expenditures, but you saw the $10 million that Andrew Kittredge got. And so to get a quality replacement for him is going to be something that's out of the Cardinals' budget, probably. And bringing that up, just since I mentioned the name Kittredge, one of the impressions that I had was almost every single relief pitcher who worked in the pen in 2024 mentioned Andrew Kittredge as a positive influence on them, on the bullpen. And this is a guy that I think they're going to miss him a lot more than just the results that he had as the eighth inning setup guy.
Absolutely. That would be number 2 on my list as well, Brian. It wasn't just the young relief pitchers or the young starting pitchers. It was, Ryan Helsley brought up Kittredge. Everybody was bringing up starting pitchers were bringing up Andrew role that his personality played as both a mentor, a brother, but also as like a friend and as somebody who's been in the league and has been through stuff. Yeah, I don't think I properly evaluated how important Andrew Kittredge was to the bullpen and the Cardinals as a whole. And it wasn't until this weekend we were given a little context as to how much in retrospect that I realized, oh man, Kittredge, that's a bigger loss than I realized. He seems like he landed, pardon me, in the perfect spot in Baltimore. Like that could not have been a better spot with his skill for him and a team.
Yeah, you mentioned Ryan Helsley. I think the biggest takeaway that I took from Helsley's session, he's still complaining about arbitration, but even though it was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But, he made the point that, hey, nobody's talked to my camp about an extension. And that's caused some people to get all nervous and upset. But you got to look at the Cardinals' history. And they're, as DeWitts said on Monday, they're a draft and development team. When's the last time the Cardinals had a guy and that they bought out his post-arbitration years? You have to go back to Paul DeYoung, or is it Colton Wong? I mean, the fact is, if the Cardinals have the model working the way they want it to work, guys are going to be there 6 years and they'll be gone and they'll be replaced by other young guys. So as much as Helsley's been an asset to the team, the fact that they haven't offered him an extension isn't a surprise to me.
Yeah, me too. Mo also talked about he was asked about clearing the deck for the next administration, and that he kind of acknowledged that went into it too. The other person who talked a little bit about an extension without bringing up the word extension was, of course, Mason Wynn. Mason talked often about how much he loves St. Louis, how he feeds off of the baseball loving nature of this particular town and this particular region. So
And
yeah,
that he wants to be with the team long term, like Yachty
yeah, Yadi and Wayno.
and Wayno. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly what he was hoping for, and that's when you that's the sense you get too. He's passionate about this town. He's passionate about baseball in this town, and yeah, the roster construction, the long term deals, the creating a little bit of runway for the Cardinals next administration. I think that was a an over enveloping theme throughout this as well. Not another big speaking of the regime changing, speaking of the changes in the organization. Another big standout to me was the role that Brant Brown is having and the enthusiasm that the new hitting coach is bringing to young hitters of young and old alike. You
His
know,
name came up. His name must have come up a dozen times.
everybody, and it didn't take prompting. With some of the guys you had to ask like about the hitting coach, the new hitting coach, but nearly all the players that came through immediately could not wait to talk about the work they've already done with Brant Brown and how much I guess mileage he's put into getting to know them, traveling to hit with them. I loved Brendan Donovan said that he hit with them an hour before the press conference, before he did all this signing. There's an energy that's going through the clubhouse on the hitter side, which I think will make fans happy. Of course, Brian, in our private conversations, you nailed it. It's still a honeymoon phase. It's worth keeping in mind that this is still the honeymoon phase, but there's an energy there that has been missing, especially with the young players, for a very, very long time.
And if folks haven't had the chance to see Sonny Gray's or listen to Sonny Gray's clip, you really need to do that because he impressed me with his cerebral nature. He got asked some tough questions because, of course, he's one of the leaders who decided to stay around. Why'd you decide to stay around, et cetera, et cetera. But, the reality of the situation was really struck when his two young sons came up and sat with him on the podium and his wife was in the back of the room. These, as LaRussa used to be, fond of saying, they're men, not machines. And Gray is committed to the Cardinals. He said, "Hey, I committed to them, and that hasn't changed." Actually, Contreras said the same thing. And you think, well, they're going to want to chase championships. They're going to chase money. Well, Sonny Gray's of an age where he's looking for stability. Certainly, he wants to be on a winning team, but him not leaving was really a statement about his comfort level in both where he is as a person, but also, of course, comfort in the team. And his comments about that he's not willing to count the Cardinals out this year, basically. It was a theme that others followed from him. I mean, not that they didn't think it anyway, but it's sort of like, Gray was quoted multiple times as having said that.
Yeah, yeah, he's just so thoughtful, and he was trying to choose his words so carefully. I got the feeling that if he was given a chance to just like let it air out, he'd say, "No, we're going to win a bunch of games, and I'm really confident in this team." He also understands the business side so well because at the same time he realizes that his outlook on the team might change throughout the year. Maybe in 3 or 4 months things haven't gone the way that he thinks it's capable of going, and maybe something will change. But he's very in touch with the person that he is, what his goals are, and what he's looking for. And he's open to anything, but you nailed it. He wants to be a St. Louis Cardinal. He wants to help energize the next generation of St. Louis Cardinals. The two, if you were to ask me just listening to the interviews, like who the two leaders are on the team, Wilson Contreras was a whole different thing because he was more fired up than I think I expected him to be. But I think we had Sonny Gray and Brendan Donovan kind of back to back, and they both gave incredibly thoughtful answers. They just did it in a different way. And I thought that having those two pretty well back to back in the interview room was an interesting juxtaposition. That really stood out to me as well.
And somebody, I can't remember who said it now. One of the other players, a number of players complimented Donovan on his leadership and that bringing the young people together. But somebody mentioned he's like a 10-year, like a 10-year veteran. We're talking about a guy who's still in arbitration. That's the kind of leadership and the confidence that Brendan Donovan brings out. He talked about his three things: performance, mentality, effort. And those aren't normally things that young players are necessarily focused on. But he really looks like he's a guy that's going to be a core player for these Cardinals in the future.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's funny as we start going over this, these are all things that like happen on day one. It was definitely an energy. It just felt so energetic. Even Mo, everybody, like there was just a certain energy in the room that maybe hasn't been there in the past. but yeah, I think Donovan, and then I guess to go to one of the last press conferences we had, and like I mentioned, Wilson Contreras, watching Wilson Contreras, he kept saying that it would have been easy for him. It would have been
In
too
fact,
easy.
pardon me for interrupting, Kyle. He said he used the word coward. I would have been a coward. I would have felt like a coward if I would have abandoned my team.
How awesome is that? And he talked about loving his teammates and being committed to the organization, being committed to the town. I thought it was really, and we heard Sonny Gray talk about it, that the organization needed to do what they're doing. I'm sure it would be nice to still have a player sticking around, but the organization needed to what we'll call a reset, because we're still trying to figure out what that word is. Sonny even asked us. That was a funny moment too. But Wilson appreciates the reset too, and he even said that it was terrible what was going on in the minor leagues. I believe he said it was really bad, or whatever his choice of words were. So that I like. I think that there's a conversation that hasn't gone on yet, and it's that the organization, the players, the veterans knew that there was something wrong once they got in. Sonny Gray talked about that. Like, he didn't know what the organization exactly was until he got here and he saw it. And the players were pretty vocal, especially towards the end of the year, about saying this organization needs something more. And the front office is taking that to heart, and they're sure they have a financial reason for doing it, but it helps them in the long run. And the players, even the older players, have bought into it and its importance. And that was a through line as well for me this weekend.
Yeah, I got to agree with you, Kyle. I mean, for Sonny Gray, a 32, 33, whatever year old, well, he's probably a little older than that, isn't he? But a veteran to say, hey, we needed to do this reset was quite a revelation, because you would think he'd say, hey, my buddy Goldschmidt just, got thrown to the curb. But he didn't say that. And he went on to say that the investments that are being made are going to be felt for the next 10 years. So, he was speaking from and said some things that surprised me, in that it, came from one of the player leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It seems like there's a cohesiveness. There were a lot of talk this week. There was a lot of talk this weekend about two very different groups. You have your veterans and then your young talent. And there was a lot of separation there in the conversation, but it never felt like they were two separate exactly entities. Like Sonny Gray talked about it. Everybody's talked about it. Like, this is the young kids clubhouse now. Of course, Mason was quick to say, it's still Sonny's clubhouse. We're still going to respect that, but they're looking to be cohesive. And there was a lot of talk last year about last year's clubhouse being really good, maybe some of the best the Cardinals have had in years. But when the goal is everybody driving in one direction, which was certainly the messaging this weekend, that can only be positive as you enter a season with question marks.
Man, there are a lot of question marks, let's face it. But it seems to a man that they're using this as motivation, and they're not saying it's us against the world, but there were a lot of different ways that were said over the weekend of, we're going to prove the doubters wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Wilson was the one who said it. Wilson. They all said it, of course, but Wilson was the last player that we had the chance to talk with, and he downright said, like, it makes him mad, and he's ready to prove people wrong. That everybody was tiptoeing around that subject without saying that, like, everybody, it wasn't so blunt all the time, but they're ready to prove people wrong. They're ready to give a chance, and the players think that the coaching changes are going to be huge. Another thing that stuck with me, speaking of coaching changes being huge, is Jordan Walker. The amount of enthusiasm he talked about working with John Jay and Victor Scott II, the amount of enthusiasm and also trial and error that he's gone through working with John Jay. And we had John Jay and Daniel Descalso up at the same time, and they were like the honeymooners almost, like finishing each other's sentences. And they have such a long-standing tradition with the St. Louis Cardinals and friendship with each other, that it also helps to see some of that cohesive nature that's coming together all at once.
And Kyle, that leadership can be provided a lot of different ways. Certainly can be provided by veteran players like Goldschmidt, but it also can be provided by veteran former players who are now coaches, who have the credibility of having been there before.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it seems like John Jay in particular, he's a little bit more political in his answers. It was fun with him and Descalso up there together. The only other combo that we got this weekend was O'Brien and Walker, which was a whole funny combo right there.
Sorry, Riley.
Yeah, sorry, Riley. We've got 300,000 questions we want to talk to Jordan about. Just be cool.
How you doing, man?
Yeah, thanks for coming. But yeah, so it was to see Descalso and Jay up there, kind of like the honeymooners finishing each other's sentences. John Jay being a little bit more political in his answers. Daniel Descalso kind of jumping in and elaborating on John Jay's answers.
Oh, I mean, when Descalso said, hey, we need Gorman to stop swinging so wildly, and we need Walker to, hit more fly balls. That's not the kind of frankness that you normally hear from a coach.
Yeah, yeah, and also the frankness. Well, we didn't get to talk with Gorman, but even Jordan talking about he didn't get into like hitting the ball on the ground less, but he did talk about line drives. He talked about finding the opposite field gap, which is something that he was always good at in the minors. As he starts to bring his hands back in a little bit. That was one of the emphasis that he and hitting coach Brown have started working on. So
You talk about Walker?
yes, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that Jordan Walker has started working on, bringing his hands. It's just there's a certain level of cohesiveness, whether it be just in messaging, which again these things will only get you so far, but in belief, I think that was constant throughout this weekend. That I tend to get hyped up about these weekends. I tend to let my fan kind of kick in a little bit more than I like, but this is the energy, the emotion, the cohesiveness was on display in a way that I have not seen in the 4-ish years that I've covered this.
I got to say that, sticking on Walker for just 1 minute, his excitement was genuine, and he's a positive guy anyway. I've never really seen him down, but this idea of returning to his 2023 base and reestablishing that base and then building from there, I think was very encouraging to me, because I was one of the people, and listen, neither you nor I are there every day seeing what's happening. But the perception that I think you and I both and many, many others had, was that they screwed Walker up. They tried to mess with him and get him to make changes, and he lost sight of who he was. And maybe the Jordan Walker 2023 wasn't so bad. If he, and if they can get back to that and maybe improve on that a little bit, it would be night and day compared to what they got from him in 2024.
Yeah, 2023 was a perfect like development year for him in a lot of ways. Sure, he had the stint in the minors, but it was a perfect developmental year for him. You could see the progressions, you could see all these things happening. So, one thing you and I both talked about is that it was nice to see him address some of the areas where he might have been a little messed up throughout the year without like throwing anybody under the bus. It was, there's a maturity in his game that is also present, maturity in the person that he is to match that energy and enthusiasm. Brian, I'd love to know what you think. He also looked bigger. Like, didn't he look?
I didn't get a chance to ask him, but Wynn threw out a comment that he was 270. Last year at this time, he was like 255 or 260, but he looks like an NFL linebacker.
He does. His like Jeff Jones kind of threw it out there real quick, but it was like his shoulders changed shape. Like they are. He's like wearing shoulder pads now as you bring out the linemen.
And I threw a comment out about that because I asked him. His body is changing. He's still 22. His body's changing, and so going back to what he was in 2023, he was a different physique in 2023 than he weighed like 25 pounds less than he is today. So how do you compensate? How do you bring that into line as well?
Yeah, and as you ask that question, that's fascinating because I feel like another one of the common themes throughout this weekend, something that I hadn't thought about until right now, is nearly all the players that talked about their bodies, talked about getting into better athletic positions. They talked about a lot of their offseason work was about understanding how their bodies worked and changing maybe some of their off-season work to get to more flexibility, to get to more athleticism.
There wasn't discuss of launch angle and lifting more weights and that kind of thing at all.
Yeah, not at all. Not 1 minute. Andre Palante gave a great answer. He talked about incorporating a pitch against lefties that might help him get lefties out. And when we asked him what the pitch was, he said it's a changeup, but the emphasis is still for me before I get to the changeup to have my other 4 pitches working once we get into spring. Before I get that, he said that Dusty Blake said to him to get your foundation and build from there.
And that was Palante, right?
Yeah, that's Palante, correct. Yeah. Palante said, get your foundation. Palante said that Dusty Blake said, get your foundation of your pitches and sure work on the changeup or whatever. But once you get those down in spring training, then add that changeup.
One of the things that I hesitated to ask the question because I didn't want to hear the answer, but I did. I asked Mo about injuries, and the reason I was that I was thinking back to the terrible flashback last year where we learned about Tommy Edmonds' wrist surgery and what that turned into. Which once Nootbaar got injured and Carlson got injured, then there was this whole train wreck, nobody to play center field, and everything kind of went downhill and unraveled from there. The good news is, Mozeliak said to the best of his knowledge, there aren't any injuries, there weren't any procedures. Now, maybe that'll change the first week of spring camp, but so far at least it appears everybody's healthy.
Yeah, maybe that's one of the positives. Not to say Tommy Edman was older, or but maybe one of the positives about going into camp with young players working to get themselves in better hitting positions, better physical shape. Like you said, not weightlifting, but understanding how their bodies move, pronating, etc. It seems like that's the first step to getting everybody to spring, and so far everything has paid off that way.
Any more observations you have to share, Kyle?
Well, that God, there was so much. I think, this is a Cardinal Nation, a prospect site. I think I could spend no less than 3 or 4 straight days talking about the 30 minutes that we talked to Quinn Matthews.
What an interesting guy. Another one that's a must listen.
Yeah, if you have to listen to it. He is really the most unique, obviously left-handed, as Brian and I can attest to, obviously left-handed human being that the Cardinals probably have in the organization. And he's so unique and so interesting. And he's driven oftentimes by his failures and the desire to be as competitive as possible, to be at the top without acknowledging that he is at the top. But yeah, I thought that was another fun thing. You talk about his press conference was interesting. He gave thoughtful answers that no one would ever give. But at the same
Yeah, he
time,
stayed like 25 minutes or 27 minutes, which for a prospect is unheard of. Usually they're gone by 5 or 6 minutes because there's no questions. Nobody asks them anything.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And then by the end, I was asking him about board games. So that's you know,
Yeah, yeah, Kyle. Yeah, you'll have to stay until the very end. Kyle's the closing segment.
uh,
But
but yeah, so
while we're talking about the rotation, let's talk a little bit more about that because one of the things that we know is that as of right now, there's 5 veteran starters. Mozeliak said, "I don't want to trade for my starting depth," and based on the track record of the guys he has, I get that on one hand. On the other hand, if you're Michael McGreevy, if you're Gordon Graceffo, and then Zach Thompson and Matthew Liberatore. Liberatore and Thompson both said that they have been asked to come to camp as starters.
mhm.
But when you're number 8 or number 9 on the list, you can't be feeling really good about your chances.
Yeah, that was been one of my complaints. We talked a little bit about it last week, as a matter of fact, Brian. I was worried that the Cardinals, as they singularly focused on trading Nolan Arenado, aren't really creating opportunities for any other positions, any other place. And it's been nice to see that all of these kids are ready to go to camp, but it's also frustrating that their opportunity is still dependent on injuries ahead of them as of right now. And yeah, sure, you can bank that somebody's probably going to get injured, a pitcher's probably going to get hurt, but I don't think that's putting the Cardinals in the best position to create opportunities or for success unless you are having real open competitions in spring, which uh, you play the contracts as we've talked about.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that you have to wait for injury to create opportunity. It doesn't seem like that's really what your primary objective to be. Now, granted, I get it. I get it. Mance is going to get injured, probably, right? So,
Yeah,
but you don't want to count on that. That
yeah,
shouldn't be your plan.
yeah, yeah, and that really is a bummer because these kids seem ready to answer the bell. I thought Zach Thompson's interview seemed really interesting to me. Just he was confident, but he was also very coy about what he was working on. He said everything's pretty much the same. He wouldn't get into velocity numbers. He said we'll see what it looks like at camp. We talked about his body. He had lost some weight last year. He said he has a little bit of that weight back. He's still feeling pretty good, but even he had a quiet confidence that uh, I just I think that this is the year to give these guys opportunities, and it still seems like that's up for debate if they really are. That isn't going to be a default bullpen chance, and you never know what happens at that point.
I had 2 takeaways from Zach Thompson. One was that he mentioned that last year he was prepared to start, obviously, then got put in the pen and then sent back to Memphis and asked to start. He said, "Hey, when I got sent down after the first month, I stunk the first month. Okay. I got sent down. I didn't expect that I would be down there the whole year and that it would take me that long to rebuild back up as a starter." The other thing that Thompson said that was interesting was he looks around and says, "Hey, all the guys I come up with have either made it or they're gone." And so he's looking over his shoulder and seeing the McGreevy's and Matthews all coming up as the guys who are going to get the spot that he should have been able to get had he been able to seize the opportunities when he had it the first time.
No, that's such a great read. That's such a great point, Brian. Yeah, it's you know, and it can't be easy in that circumstance. You see Palante, you've been in the rotation with McGreevy for the last month of the season. You saw Quinn Matthews. You see all these accolades. His entire time in the Cardinals organization has been somewhat tumultuous, from when he got drafted to the COVID lost year to starting at AAA after COVID. And is he a rotation piece? He struggled bad? Is he a bullpen piece? And he seems confident in himself, but that's just another example of maybe the limbo that you put some of your players in if they don't really have a defined role or a defined opportunity. 3 years after they make their 2 years after they make their major league debut, they're still trying to figure out who they are and what role they have the potential of even having in the organization. An organization that keeps promising opportunity, but isn't necessarily creating the opportunities available.
Yeah, agreed. One other guy that was on my list was Alec Burleson, who really came off with a higher level of confidence than I expected from him, and that he had some ups and some downs during the year. But what I thought was interesting, one of the things he said was, "Hey, I'm more confident at first base." Not a surprise, I guess, if you watch him play. He said, "Yeah, I'll go out in the outfield if I'm needed for a day or two, or something like that." And it was one of those where it's almost like he'd sort of turned the page on being an outfielder, and that this first base, however it shakes out between first base and DH with he and Contreras, is sort of what Burleson seems to have his eye on. And again, I'm reading between the lines a little bit, but that was the perception that I had. What did you think?
Absolutely. The whole first base dynamic got more interesting for me this weekend because I was kind of under the impression too that Burleson would get most of his time at DH and then maybe split a little time at first and in the outfield, but messing around in the corner. But you nailed it. His expectations are to play first more than anything, spend some time on the outfield and DH. And then at the same time, Wilson Contreras was talking about getting work with Jose Oquendo at first, this offseason. But at the same time, like, not necessarily. I don't mean like working extra hard, but it does sound like Wilson Contreras, as he moves to first, is going to start. He's going to rely on his athleticism as much as reps during spring to get him through it. It wasn't like I've been working with a specialist. I have, for months and months and months, or I was working with Goldie's people, or it was none of that. It was just, well, I'm pretty athletic. I'll get through it. I've been working with Oquendo and Stubby Clapp. And then at the same time, Luke and Baker was just ready for whatever role is available to him. And he answered some questions well. But yeah, like I'm the first base dynamic, I've been kind of dismissive of it. I just figured that it'd be Wilson's for 100, 120 games in the year. You just roll with him. But I guess we'll see how that actually plays out. Yeah.
Any final takeaways you have? I pretty much exhausted the list of things I wanted to mention, but I want to make sure you get a chance if you have any others, any hot buttons you want to share.
Yeah, it's a lot of really small things with me. Thomas Sajaci didn't really seem to have a feel for where his biggest opportunity is. Maybe that's something that will shake out after Arenado is traded, a utility role. I thought Brendan Donovan, speaking of the utility role, Brendan Donovan, and I'm not sure if this is something they've talked to the organization about, but Brendan Donovan mentioned that he's kind of threw it in passing. It wasn't an emphasis of his talk, but that if he had to sub in for Mason a day at short, as he talked about working throughout the diamond. I thought that was interesting, probably reading too much into it. But other than that, it was more the things that were overarching that stood out to me, maybe less so than what exactly people were saying. I was kind of surprised that and I know Nootbaar does his own thing, but Newt hasn't really worked with Brant Brown. That kind of surprised me. I thought that he would be full throttle into it. And then,
he said he sent him video. He said he sent him video multiple times. So he is working with him just remotely, not directly.
Exactly. And then, the last half an hour of interviews were the DeWitts.
Oh, before you start, I want to come back to Nootbaar for just a sec, because what did come through. He's getting the message that says, I've got to find a way to be healthy and to play the entire season. I got to stop running into outfield walls. I got to do a better job with my nutrition and being ready day to day. So at least the message, it seems like Nootbaar's he didn't talk at all about, hey, what am I doing in the cage? Or what am I doing? It was about, how do I get myself, my body, and my mind prepared to play a full season? And that's the challenge that's been given to him, right? Nobody's worried about his talent. It's like, yeah, but you got to stay on the field or you're going to be, the next Tyler O'Neill.
Yeah. Oh God, what a perfect. Yeah, that's it exactly. And at the same time, speaking of Lars, there's an expectation to be a leader. He kind of talked about that a little bit. He got
But
into
you got to
that a little.
perform before you can lead, right?
and I feel like he was trying to say that without actually saying that. He said something about like answering the bell or whatever. But yeah, the Lars has to be a leader, and it has to be his way. And he mentioned this. You have to be the person you are. You can't be somebody different. So he has to lead in whichever way he finds. And another interesting thing. Again, he wasn't here, but we heard Brendan Donovan and Alec Burleson both talk about the leadership role that Nolan Gorman wants to play. Burleson got into detail about it a little bit more, but
which was very interesting given his struggles.
yeah, exactly. And Burleson didn't want to put any unneeded pressure on Gorman, but Burley seemed pretty excited about some of the gains that Nolan Gorman has made on his own, working. They've kind of all been working together, the three of them. But there's that middle group of not so young players and not so old players in the realm of players' age that really is. And Gorman's 23 or whatever, but that is basically Nolan Gorman, Alec Burleson, Lars Nootbaar, and Brendan Donovan, who are going to have to catalyze this cohesiveness, this growing and needed cohesiveness. And that was definitely something that was throughout the entire weekend as well.
Now, I stopped you. You were starting to roll into the DeWitts. We really didn't talk a lot about what ownership had to say, which was, of course, one of the biggest presentations of the weekend. But I guess for me, there weren't a lot of surprises.
Yeah, I was going to say, the last half an hour, the DeWitts talked, and there really wasn't anything that stood out. I thought everybody asked good questions. It wasn't like they let the DeWitts off the hook, like fans like to say, or it wasn't like that. There were questions that needed
Come
answering. I
on,
thought,
Kyle, you're part of that soft St. Louis media.
yes, what can I say? The media in this town is soft, Brian.
Yeah, here we are.
um, but there were good questions. There were. I think that if we're going to talk about like what my takeaway was just from the DeWitts is that they, at least Bill DeWitt the third, because it seemed a little bit more aware of that he needs to be smarter about how he talks, the message that he talks.
Yeah, he didn't say anything stupid like hey, if the fans are dumb if they don't come to the ballpark, right?
Yeah, he was definitely better, and It didn't seem like he was even at the end of the season presser, he seemed a little dismissive. Not only with that statement, but in some of the things that he was answering, it was kind of dismissive, kind of dismissive, kind of dismissive, and it definitely seemed like whether that just be for whatever reason, that some of that was gone. Mr. DeWitt the third was definitely more open, a little bit more elaboratory, like elaborated a little bit more on what he was saying, and that I think that was important. There was an answer I asked about tickets. I asked about ticket sales. I was interested to see how that, and he gave an answer that is a whole different world than I'll ever understand. I'm gonna have to re-listen to that because he was talking about the secondary market, and I remember while he was talking,
Yeah, them
thinking,
trying to
"Oh,
tighten up the secondary market, which means I perceived it as, hey, we want to make sure we grab our share of the pie, and the secondary people don't get it. We're going
yeah."
to restrict the season ticket holders from selling their tickets or something like that. And I may have been reading wrong, but
So okay, so the little bit that I could comprehend, that my pea brain could comprehend, that's exactly what I was thinking too. I was like, "Oh, so I asked you how many tickets you guys sold, and you said we're coming after the secondary market." Um, and then, of course, I guess the other little bit of news that came out of it was that when they do start their direct to consumer online streaming service, that it probably will be right about $20. They haven't nailed it down. They haven't locked it down.
which isn't a big surprise. That's what has been in other markets. The real question is what towns will be able to get it?
Yeah. I know we talked about it, but like Kansas, I know that there's some concern that other MLB towns might not still get it. But they made it sound like they brought up Kansas City by name as one of those towns, and I think that's a tell, that's a sign that's going to be good for Cardinal fans all over the country.
Especially the ones who haven't been able to see the telecast, have been starving for years to get it because of these archaic, blackout rules. And it seems now the only way they're going to get around the blackout rules is to create an entirely new offering that isn't really covered by them, sadly. But if that's what it takes, if I was in those areas, I would pay the $20.
Yeah, again, I'll put my rose colored glasses on, my cardinal colored glasses, my cardinal underwear on, and I'll say $20 a month. Like the amount of money I spend, stupid. I can easily swallow $20 a month, less than $1 a game in a month, to watch the thing that I watch already for $80 a month through a different provider.
And hey, while you're at it, spend $79.95 a year to join the Cardinal Nation. Haven't raised our price in 20 years now. Uh, As you can tell, I'm segueing into the close here. We went a little longer than usual, but there's an awful lot to discuss about winter warm-up, and you can come to Cardinal Nation and see synopses of the talks if you don't want to spend the time to listen to the audio. And I think I'll probably grab some of Kyle's videos that he's posted up as well and share there so everybody can catch up on the proceedings over the weekend, over the upcoming days. And you'll be seeing a lot of articles, not only from us, but on other sites as they're sort of regurgitating and the words that were said this weekend, both in the media sessions and in the main tent sessions. Also wanted to mention before we close that the Cardinal Nation Prospect Guide book has gone to the printer. So my target date to do the first mailings should be right around the 1st of February, within a couple of days from there. And for those of you who have ordered the PDF version, you should already have it. And if you order it now, you'll get it the same day. So please look at the Cardinal Nation Prospect Guide for 2025. Put a lot of effort into it. Kyle's predecessor, Blake Newberry, did a great job as always on the scouting reports. So Kyle, thanks for your second opportunity here, and the first one as a formal co-host. And I'm really looking forward to working with you this year.
I'm excited. I've really enjoyed these last two, and I would just like to echo your sentiment. Get that prospect handbook. What a beautiful and awesome thing that you've created for another year.
Yeah, 8 years now going, and we'll keep it going as long as people are interested. And last year we sold out the hardcover books. It didn't happen on day one, obviously, but I order based on the previous year's sales. So if you want it, make sure you get early on, and you can follow these prospects in spring training all the way through the season. Thanks again, Kyle, and we will talk to you next Wednesday, the 29th.